Good morning, this is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another 9th Age Beta Report, another Empire of Sohnstahl versus Dread Elves. So this is Game 4 for the Bloodstone of Levnana, a 5-part mini-campaign series that I've been playing. Duke Peter Whitestone stared grimly at the shimmering gateway. "You're sure this portal is safe for our reinforcements to travel by?" "The math does not lie. It should be safe. For a while," Master Edward replied with as much belief in his voice as he could muster. "How long will it take for the troops to arrive?" the Duke asked, turning to look upon the ragtag band of men some might mistake for an army. "It should be instantaneous once the reinforcements touch the portal. How long it takes them to assemble before that is outside my realm of expertise." "Well, it better be soon," the Duke growled, putting on his helmet. "The foul witches have found us." Alright, so for this battle, we did a diagonal deployment, so we fused flank. You can see that my opponent is on the left, kind of left corner, I'm on the bottom right. At the bottom right, next to the tape measure, you can see the kind of stonework. That is the old Garden of Moor gateway. We are using that as our portal. Once more, as this is part of the campaign, we have unique characters. So my opponent's army is being led by Alara Clavemore. She is a unique Beastmaster character. She has her war cry, so she has devastating charge, distracting, and hatred. The Spear of Agony, so at the beginning of combat she makes an attack. If she hits, then the opponent has a -1 to hit her in close combat, so she's very tanky. And then she has the Tiara of Rage, which gives her +1 armor and battle focus. You can also see the rest of her stats if you'd like to pause and look through that. So for the Empire of Sohnstahl, I have 2 unique characters. So I have my general, who is Duke Peter Whitestone. He is a knight commander. He is the Sword of Retribution, so he has +1 strength, +1 AP, flaming attacks, and multiple wounds D3. The Armor of Virtue, which is plate armor, gives him a 5-up Aegis and lets him have a 3d6 discipline test. Tactical Supremacy, so he can give a single order to a parent, support, or knight unit. And then he is the first knight because he is a knight commander. And then I have Master Edward Talbot. He is a wizard of alchemy. He is a wizard master. He is the Book of Disdain, which allows him to know all 6 spells from the Path of Alchemy, but he cannot take the heredity spell. He has the Crystal Gazer, which once per turn the bearer can reroll all power or spell dice, but must take the second result. And the Apron of Tincture, which is the bearer gains an Aegis 4-up and has his armor set to 4. So, Master Talbot had the Path of Alchemy, so he had all 6 spells. My opponent had 2 Wizard Adepts, so spoilers for Game 3, but since the Empire of Sohnstahl won Game 3, they currently have the Bloodstone of Levnana in their possession, which means that the Dark Elves, or Dread Elves, cannot take a Wizard Master. So my opponent is limited to Adepts. So they have an Adept with the Alchemy and Adept of Witchcraft. So the portal, which you can kind of see here in the bottom left of this picture, has 6 hit points and has a res of 6. And so what the portal allows is it allows the Empire player to bring in 1,000 points of reinforcements on turns 2, 4, and 6 on a 4-up. So the second objective for this game, the Dread Elves are trying to destroy the gate. So if they destroyed the gate, they got +3 victory points. They didn't lose any if they didn't achieve it, they just didn't get the victory points. And the Empire reinforcements act as negative points towards Dread Elf's victory points. So for example, if the Dread Elf player killed 2,500 points worth of Empire troops, but I brought on a unit which cost 500 points, then the Dread Elf player would only gain 2,000 victory points instead of the 2,500. So hopefully that makes sense. So if we look at my opponent's list, on their far right, they have the Disciples of the Scarlet Serpent, a group of 3 Gorgons. Behind them is the Stalking Death. To the left of them is the Fanatical Revelers of the Hunt, so the old Dancers of Yema. And with them is the Frigga, the Forge Master, who is the Alchemy Adept. To the left of them is Nessie, a Hydra. To the left of them is Desra's Judgment, a group of 15 Judicators with the I have the Gorgon banner, and behind them is my opponent's general, Alara Clavemore, on her Manticore. And then kind of on my opponent's right flank, my left side, they have a repeater crossbow, a swift death, which is 17 crossbows. With them is Morgana, the Candle Witch. Behind them is a chariot with the crossbow. To the left of them is a block of silver spears, so like 25 spearmen, I think. And on the far left, Revelers of the Full Moon, which are just 5 light infantry with repeater crossbows. So if we look at my army, so on the far right, outside of this picture, I have a group of 5 rangers, which scouted out ahead. And then on the far right, I have the South Militia, which is just a block of 20 militia. With them, I have an Inquisitor. You can kind of see him with the little flame. To the left of them, I have the Talheim 5th, which is a block of 10 knights, which survived the previous battle. The Swift Death, which is a volley gun, also survived the last battle. And then the Mud Boots on the left-hand side of this picture, which is 5 more rangers. In the center of my line, I have the Black Ravens, which is just 20 crossbowmen. With them is Master Edward, the wizard. To the left of them, I have my Silver Pikes, which is just a block of halberdiers. And with them is Hans Talheim, who is a Marshal BSB. He was also in my previous battle, but I dismounted him for this combat. And then on my left flank, I have the War Guard, so 3 War Elephants with Peter Whitestone. The East Militia. In front of them, I have the Express Riders, which is just riders with the repeating rifles. And then in the forest, I have the Abbot followers. So I picked deployment sides. My opponent dropped the entire army to go first. So this is turn 1, Dread Elves. So my opponent was fairly aggressive moving up. Over here on their left flank, they were a little bogged down with moving troops to kind of get out of the way. You can see that the Dancers kind of got stuck behind the Hydra, so didn't get out as far movement as they could have, but the rest of the army moved up pretty aggressively. On my opponent's right flank, they moved up pretty aggressively. You can see the crossbows took on to the hill, the spears moved up, the chariot started moving around. So this is after magic and shooting. So you can see that my opponent got off Twisted Effigy on my crossbows, which is unfortunate. And then they managed to kill off 7 of my 10 riders. So they have pretty much made those no longer combat efficient, but they can still serve as chaff if I need them to. So that brings us to turn 1 for the Empire of Sohnstahl. So first I declared a charge with my knights into my opponent's Thunder Pack. The knights have the Banner of Speed, and I was coming off of a hill, so it was a pretty decent charge. My opponent decided to flee. I decided to redirect into the Hydra. I figured the Talheim 5th with the lances would be the best chance I had at just killing the Hydra, so I went ahead and redirected into the Hydra. So this is what it kind of looks like after movement. For the most part, I didn't really move up the rest of my lines. You can see I moved up the Rangers a little bit to kind of serve as chaff, and then moved the Elephants up a little bit just so they kind of cleared the portal, so if I got reinforcements next turn, they wouldn't kind of clog up. In Magic phase, I managed to get Glory for Gold off on my Knights, and then of course made my opponent's Hydra flammable, so that way, one, it no longer got its Fortitude save, but also I had rerolls to wound. In shooting phase, my volley gun managed to put 2 wounds on the Medusae, which you can kind of see the wound marker on the right-hand side of this. And then in combat, my opponent killed 3 of my knights, and I managed to put 4 wounds on the Hydra. So not too bad. I wasn't quite able to put those last 2 wounds on, but hopefully maybe next turn I can get those last 2 wounds off, since I still have the buffs. So that brings us to turn 2. So my opponent countercharged. They charged the Medusae into the flank of my knights, and charged their general into my rangers. In Magic phase, once more, my opponent was able to get Twisted Effigy off on my crossbows, so they couldn't shoot. And they were also able to get off Glory for Gold off on their Medusae, and made my knights flammable. So now, basically everybody's flammable, and everybody has flaming attacks in that fight, almost. So this is what it looks like pre-combat. And post-combat, my opponent killed all but one of my knights. I unfortunately was unable to put any more wounds on the Hydra. I broke from combat. My opponent had me run from the Hydra. So I fled, and the Hydra chased, caught me, and the Medusa just kind of turned around to face the militia. In combat with the general easily wiped out my Rangers, and then had like a 12-inch overran and overran into my crossbows. My opponent decided to charge into the corner so it could attack Edward if it needed to. So that brings us to Empire of Sohnstahl turn 2. So now I did some of my counter charges. So first I declared a charge with my knights, my war elephants, into my opponent's crossbows with the wizard. They fled. And so I decided to redirect into the spearmen. So here I could have either redirected into the Judicators or the spearmen. I feel since the Judicators was still at 15 strong that they would just kill the elephants before I even had a chance to go. I know spears also have lethal strike against cavalry, and so I'd probably still take several wounds, but I figured my odds were better against the spearmen. However, as it turned out, I actually passed the redirect, but failed the charge, so I only stumbled forward a few inches. You can see in the bottom right of this picture, I also countercharged my opponent's general with my block of halberdiers. My plan is to just challenge with my champion, so my opponent will just completely kill my champion, and then I will hopefully break my opponent through combat res alone. On the right, I decided not to charge with my militia. Since I have pistols, I figured I'd just move up within range and just take some pot shots. So that's basically what I did. And then in Magic, I managed to get Corruption of 10 off on my opponent's general, so I managed to lower its armor save by 1. So my plan worked pretty well with my opponent's general. I challenged, my opponent wiped out my poor champion, and then I managed to break my opponent's general through combat res and cause it to flee. However, I was unable to catch it, as you can see. In shooting, my militia managed to put one more wound on my opponent's Medusae and killed off one model. And that was it. So that brings us to turn 3, Dread Elves. So my opponent charged the Thunder Pack into my second group of Rangers, and the Medusae into my militia. And then over here, kind of in the center of the board, so I used my riders as chaff against the spearmen, so my opponent couldn't charge both the Judicators and the spearmen into my knights. So my opponent charged the spearmen into my riders, and declared a charge with the Judicators into my general. I decided to go ahead and flee this charge. I had plenty of space and my opponent couldn't really get to me, so I went ahead and fled behind my lines, as you can see here. My opponent decided not to redirect, or maybe just failed to redirect into my halberdiers. In Magic phase, nothing of overall significance occurred this round. I managed to use my Binding Scroll, which my Inquisitor had, to bind Twisted Effigy this turn, and then I think I dispelled the only other thing that I really was worried about. In combat, the Medusae wiped out the militia. My Inquisitor was able to, I think, put 3 wounds on one Medusae and kill it completely, and then my militia managed to put 1 more wound on the last one, but I still broke from combat, and my opponent chased me down and caught me, as you can see here. And then to the right of this picture, the Thunder Pack, of course, wiped out the Rangers with no problem. And then over here on the left-hand flank, my opponent, of course, wiped out my Outriders, or my Riders, with no problem, and then just kind of turned to face my incoming charges. So on my turn, I, of course, countercharged, so I charged both of my Flagellants in the front and my Militia in the flank. I also charged my Halberdiers into my opponent's Judicators, which just kind of stumbled forward. I decided not to charge my opponent's general, because now that both my volley gun and my crossbows could shoot this turn, I figured I'd shoot at my opponent's general, maybe try to get Corruption of 10 off again, and decrease its armor save, and then just put as many wounds through with the shooting as I could. So of course I made that charge, and I made that charge. I think they were all pretty close to auto wins. So this is what it looks like kind of going into the magic shooting phase. Because my opponent's Hydra was, or sorry, not Hydra. So you notice that the Hydra is missing though. I did manage to kill the Hydra last turn with my volley gun. That's what it shot at, and managed to kill that. So in shooting, my volley gun and my crossbow shot at my opponent's general and managed to put 4 wounds. I put all but 1 wound. I know it had 1 wound left. So I think it has 4 wounds. So I think I put 3 wounds on the general. And then in close combat, of course, yeah, I mean, my opponent killed several of my crazies, but I managed to wipe out my opponent. I might have just killed them outright and then just overran, as you can see here. And then in combat over here, I didn't do as well as I thought. I had my Marshal who allowed me to fight with 3 ranks, so I had 15 attacks, plus the Marshal himself. But I was only able to put in 4 wounds. My opponent killed several of me. I think I won combat just because I had the extra ranks and the banners, but it wasn't enough to cause my opponent to break, so we just stood there for the next round. So that brings us to turn 4. So on turn 4, my opponent declared a charge with the general into the flank of my halberdiers. My halberdiers are actually within 8 inches of my crossbows, so my parental unit being charged stood because they were in combat, but my detachment went ahead and stand and shot my opponent's general, and I actually managed to put that 1 wound on that I had left last turn. So I managed to shoot my opponent's general off the board. Because this is the campaign, while the unique character can't die, so she was only injured, I get her points, but she will be back for the next battle. My opponent also declared a charge with the dancers into my flank. It was a pretty long charge. I think it was like a 10 or 11-inch charge. But, you know, with some good news of killing the general, there was some bad news with my opponent rolling extremely high and charging in the flank with the dancers. So this is kind of what the board looks like, as you can see here. So I did manage to rally my knights last turn. I didn't say that. My opponent also managed to rally their crossbows last turn, which I didn't say. So for movement, my opponent decided to just basically turn the crossbows around and march as far away from my crazies and militia as they could get. And then in magic phase, they use Raven's Wing to move even further along. You can also see in the center of the board, you can see that combat. So this is what it looks like before combat, and this is what it looks like after combat. So between the dancers and the adjudicators, I lost close to 30 halberdiers, I believe. I only managed to kill 3 in return. Of course, this was an auto break, so my opponent decided to have me break from the adjudicators and flee towards the gate, and gave chase with both. The adjudicators only rolled like 2 inches, so they just kind of stumbled forward, but the dancers rolled pretty high and managed to catch them and then overrun, as you can see here. So in the Empire of Sohnstahl's counter phase, I declared a charge with my War Elephants into my opponent's dancers. I wasn't too worried about this. My opponent did do a lot of wounds last turn against my halberdiers, but halberdiers being, you know, resistance 3 and only 6 up armor, my opponent could do quite a few wounds. With my elephants having res 4 and having a 2 up armor save, I was less worried. So I went ahead and charged into here. You can also see in this picture that my opponent has managed to put 2 wounds on the gate with their riders, which have kind of moved around and have just been shooting at the gate basically every turn. In magic and shooting, there wasn't a whole lot that happened. My volley gun shot at my opponent's Medusae and managed to wipe it off the board before it had a chance to charge and kill it. And then I think my crossbows shot at the adjudicators and whittled them down a little bit. So this is what it looks like post-combat. You can see I charged in. I did lose an elephant, and my opponent did manage to put 2 wounds on my general, but I was able to wipe out about half of the dancers and broke them from combat. I gave chase and wiped them out. Also, I should say, so this was turn 4, so this was my second chance to get reinforcements through, and as of yet, I have yet to roll a 4-up. So no reinforcements have arrived yet on either turn 2 or 4. So I do have a chance on turn 6 to get the rest of my reinforcements in, so hopefully I can roll a 4-up then. So that brings us to turn 5. So on turn 5, my opponent countercharged with the judges or adjudicators into my elephants. At this point, I figured I could go ahead and take it. Hopefully, I could survive enough of the wounds so that I would have enough elephants left to strike back. And then my opponent also charged the Thunder Pack into the volley gun. I couldn't do anything about this, but luckily for me, my opponent rolled poorly and was unable to complete that charge. They did, of course, complete this charge. And then in movement, my opponent kind of moved up the crossbows out of the woods to move closer to my crossbows. The repeater just kind of turned around to shoot at my crazies. And then in magic phase, my opponent only has the witchcraft now because I managed to kill the alchemy wizard. They managed to get the Raven's Wing off, the big version, and so they move the crossbows even closer to my lines. In combat, my opponent rolled fairly poorly, kind of fluffed their attacks, and only managed to put 2 wounds on my elephants, and managed not to take that last wound off on my general, and I was able to wipe out my opponent's. I just wiped them out. I didn't have to chase them, I just managed to kill them, which was nice. However, in shooting, because my opponent managed to Raven Wing their figures in the very short range of my crossbows, they peppered my crossbows and killed all but 3 and the wizard, which then broke from a panic test and started fleeing. And then on my turn, I failed to rally my crossbows and wizard, so they fled off the board. I declared a charge with my elephants and my crazies into the remaining bolt thrower. My elephants made it, my fanatics did not, and I made short work of that. That wasn't too bad. My volley gun went ahead and shot at my opponent's Thunder Pack that was coming in. I figured I could have shot either the Thunder Pack or the crossbows. I don't think I could have caused enough wounds to wipe out the crossbows, and they might have failed a panic test, but being elves with leadership 8 or 9, I was concerned that they would not break. So I decided to just shoot at the Thunder Pack, and I managed to wipe out them. So that brings us to turn 6. So for my opponent, all they really had left was the crossbows and the riders who were shooting at the gate. So the crossbows shot at the volley gun and managed to kill it, and the riders managed to put another wound on the gate, so it now had 5 wounds, but was still alive, or still active, with 1 wound remaining. On my turn, I was unable to roll a 4-up, so none of my reinforcements arrived. So we kind of ended the game with my opponent unable to destroy the gate, and me being unable to get any reinforcements. Duke Peter Whitestone looked down at the small hill he sat upon. The sight was glorious. Rank upon rank of shining steel and fresh troops. With the army of the capital, he could rid the world of the vile elves once more. Alara knelt as the shadow grew. Sister, is it not done yet? The humans have proven more difficult to annihilate than anticipated, Alara replied, trying to keep her voice calm. No matter. I will see to their extermination, Desra hissed. So if we count up the battle, so the Dread Elves managed to kill 3,343 points of Empire. The Empire managed to kill 3,880 points of Dread Elves. So that brings it to an 8-12. Because the Dread Elves were unable to destroy the gate, it remains at an 8-12. And because I was unable to bring in any reinforcements, my opponent's 3,343 points stays the way it is. And so it ended up being an 8-12 in the side of the Empire. So an Empire victory, which is good. So what this means for the next battle is that my opponent will be unable to take a wizard because I still have the Bloodstone in my possession. And the next game will also be a 6,000 point battle, so it's going to be a little bit bigger. And also, all unique characters become mortal next game. So up to this point, if any of our unique characters died, they will just injured and would return in the next battle if they needed to. However, next game, all unique characters are mortal, and if they die, it means they're dead. So if we decide to do another campaign in the future, they will not be able to be used. So those of you who are following my channel regularly will know that this is our second campaign. So my first campaign with my opponent had the same two characters and they both survived. I had Peter Whitestone, but I had a different wizard because my other wizard had died. So this is why I have a new wizard for this campaign. But overall, we enjoyed the game. We hope you enjoyed the game as well. If you have any comments, please put them in the comment section below. And as always, like and subscribe. And as always, game on.